Did you not hear that? Right. I just gave you the screen.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, you were on mute. I wasn't sure if you were
oh, sorry.
Okay, cool. I will share my screen. Okay, so hi, my name is Mara Stegaru. Thank you so much for having me today. So I am an interdisciplinary designer with experience in a lot of different fields. And I just graduated from Florida International University with my master's in landscape architecture and environmental and urban design. So just to give you a little more background about me, over the past 3 years in my master's, my work both in studio and through FIU ASLA as the president have molded my process and ethics to center around deep research and analysis, regenerative systems, ecological and cultural heritage, community, and most of all, collaboration, which is what I will be talking most about today. So while my areas of practice in civil engineering before landscape architecture prepared me with a technical background for my data-driven process, it's really the relationships that I have built with my professors, my fellow FIU ASLA members, my community, and most notably my classmates that have had the greatest influence on how I view design. So the supportive and trusting culture that we've built through my cohort in the past 3 years in the program and at FIU through ASLA is the culture that I really wish to take moving forward in my career. And the relationships that I made really locked in the importance of collaboration in our field. So I'm really excited to discuss that today and how that could possibly translate from school into professional practice. So yeah. I'm going to start with my master's project. So during the pandemic, our program went completely remote. So I finished my final half of grad school on the computer. So what my class immediately noticed was that we could no longer talk to each other casually about our projects, which was something we did a lot between classes and studio. So we had to make more deliberate efforts now with a physical distance between us to actually have these conversations about our work. But we also realized how much of an influence we have on each other's work, and we didn't really want to lose this dynamic at all. So due to the openness of our master's project professor, Linda Chamorro, and her willingness to collaborate with us as well on the entire structure of our studio, we collectively decided to work on our projects in a regional story for South and Central Florida called Towards More Just Futures, Spatial Agency as a Tool for Social and Environmental Justice, as part of the LAF Green New Deal Super Studio. So we made a website as well to kind of show all of our projects together. But basically each student had an individual project that works off of and in harmony with the other projects in the other acts to collectively imagine how Green New Deal style policy in the US might take shape in the form of specific planning and design projects in our region. So by midterm, we'd realized that our projects would be stronger together and supported by our collective research and visioning, rather than us repeating ourselves or having to do all of the research for one topic when another student had already covered that topic. So with this regional story separated into acts, we were able to contextualize issues of redlining in Act 1, issues of our marine environment in Act 2, things about, forced migration and human migration in Act 3, and regenerative land management in Act 4, all as design agents with and for our communities. So on our website, you can also view pieces of the project as well as the research introductions done by each group. So this was my group. So each of our projects were individual, but they all kind of formed one one narrative. So through a focus on narrative, we were able to collaborate organically and incorporate inspiration from each other's work into our own designs. So collaboration was really, really key in our master's projects. So the spirit of collaboration even came, the spirit of collaboration even came down to our individual projects. So this is my project, Space for Dreaming, Repairing Narratives of the American Dream Through Desire-Driven Urbanism. So as our collaborative studio culture really modeled the culture that we were all dreaming of in our projects. So this wasn't only the way we worked, but it was also what we designed. So my project examines the individualist narrative of the American dream in hopes of preparing it to make space for the dreams of historically exploited groups to uphold unjust power structures through a framework called desire-driven urbanism. Or sorry, I think I mixed up my words. The project does not uphold unjust power structures, but it makes space for dreams of people who were historically exploited to uphold those power structures. Had to make that clear. So desire-driven urbanism is the framework that I developed, and it's based around the relationships between people in an urban environment. So this framework is a synthesis of demands from activist movements in the US that revolve around regenerative economies, collective work, and holistic well-being through urban development. So instead of submitting to an exploitative worldview, this framework shifts to a worldview of caring, sacredness, and deep democracy. All really to foster, again, collaboration in our communities and in our urban development. When I was starting the research on this topic, I kept coming back to the disruption of relationships between people, culture, and nature as a tool of exploitative and extractive systems like settler colonialism to own and take from the land. So the disruption of these relationships enables the exploitative and destructive systems that we see today. Exploitative ideals like manifest destiny, forced migrations of people into new regions for the benefit of this settler economy, which is the foundation of American development today. But from all of this strife came new dreams, new visions, new progress towards truly equitable and just futures for all. The migration of Black, Indigenous, and immigrant people, while propelled by exploitative systems, they do also propel urban change and growth. So the creation of these multi-ethnic communities in the US are what breed solidarity and help find common ground and visions for just transitions away from these destructive systems. So migrations, and therefore the relationships and collaboration between people, are the catalysts for these just futures. My project takes place in Lakeland, which is a mid-sized city in Polk County, Florida. And this is going to be a high impact location due to all of the projected migrations, people being pushed here by climate damage, sea level rise, but they're also bringing these new diverse demographics to a white majority area with a history of racial tension and violence. So the driving questions for my design at this point became, what kinds of worlds would these communities build here together, and how would they build them? Well, it turns out that in Lakeland, Florida, the community of Moorhead had already built itself from the ground up. Moorhead was established by Black pioneers brought by the railroad, citrus, and phosphate industries in the 1880s. So this community quickly established gathering spaces, sacred spaces, and most notably educational systems for Black children in Lakeland by the late 1920s. So this community grew stronger through the decades and was really undeterred by racial tensions in the South. In 1938, they stood up against the KKK and defended their community. But in the 70s, the city demolished this entire community for a new convention center, surface parking, and veteran memorial park. So now in 2020, they seek to move a Confederate monument from downtown to this site against the wishes of former Moorhead residents. So then more questions came up in my research, again, focused around collaboration and relationships with people. What if in 2025, the new demographics helped resist this status quo? And what if they threw this relocated monument into the lake? And what would this mean for Lakeland in the future in 2040? So to begin to address these questions, I returned to collaboration as a driver. And by this time, I wanted to cast my net wider than just feedback from my peers. So using Google Forms, I created this short form self-guided activity to gauge what my community desires from their landscape on a daily basis. So this was mostly from my friends. I used social media just as a test of how people would respond to this kind of activity. So supplementing my findings from this with demographic data and feedback from my peers, I was able to create a set of characters that represent the diverse and progressive community that could propel Lakeland forward in the near future. And I used these people as the real drivers of my design. So what I've learned at FIU is that the best way to know what to design is to literally just ask people what they want. So I did that. And I asked, what is important to you? And yeah, so this activity really shifts the focus from the vast issues that the city needs to overcome to the everyday desires of people that are directly impacted by these issues, which indirectly can create spaces for communities to really address a lot of issues. So just by getting people to think about and observe their surroundings, I was able to put together a story of a community, one that's creative, that's drawn to nature, that values relationships with family and friends, enjoys public space, but is blocked by the built environment and our economic structures. So this brought to light another driving question for my design. If we give people what they want, public transportation, more nature, walkable neighborhoods, flexible open spaces, what could they do with those spaces? So that eventually brought me to my proposal, which came together kind of more like a skit of all of the opportunities that could open up to the people of Lakeland just through the design and connection of their urban spaces. So in 2040, we follow Jason, Daniela, Iliana, and Said through Lakeland's Keystone Link, which is what I designed, to explore the relationships they create throughout their day in these spaces. So organically, the group builds opportunity with their community as they move through the sequence of urban spaces. So using the principles of desire-driven urbanism, Lakeland was able to repair this historic link between Lake Wire and Lake Beulah, was able to reappropriate industrial and car-oriented spaces, and was able to limit sprawl while densifying for rising populations. So just with street connections focusing on linking people, it increases access options for all communities to mix and relate with one another. And now, presumably in this new future, all of Lakeland's projects following the destruction of the monument in 2025 make space for all through community-driven and participatory collaborative processes. So this is an example of the reappropriation of parking and industrial land that creates space for the community to use, whether it be public space, education, sustenance, shelter, whatever the community needs. Just by allowing that space to exist, people can create their own relationships and collaborate to design, and sparks a lot of relationships and creates a lot of new opportunities. And in these spaces, which in 2020 are currently completely devoid of human life, people can now relate to one another informally and organically to build their community and economy together. So that was just a couple of examples of how in studio, we, especially this year, really focused on collaboration and storytelling in that way. But through FIU ASLA, that's another place where I was really able to explore collaboration differently. So this year, my class was not the only one hit by a lack of studio culture and a lack of relating to each other, because at FIU, at least in our program, all the years really help each other out. We talk to each other a lot. People in like second year or in first year will always get help on stuff from third years. So that's something that being completely remote was much more difficult to do organically. So this collective desire spurred the creation of the Spotlight Workshop series. And this is a collaborative project led by students and professional alumni to share their unique landscape architecture talents using only virtual modalities. So this year, our team of workshop leaders developed an array of topics based on direct feedback from our students on skills they would like to exercise and learn more about outside of class. But our two main goals are to create a virtual version of our collaborative studio culture and to use open source, open access education as a tool for spreading greater awareness across disciplines to the many facets of our field. So from the very beginning, planning was collaborative. We started with an interest meeting and survey to see who would participate, what people wanted to learn, and what people wanted to share. With this initial assessment, we then went in and got more specific feedback from participants in the actual meeting. So from there, workshop leaders met regularly to develop a curriculum and objectives for each lesson. Each workshop also provided extra resources for further learning. The entire group agreed that sharing sources would provide incentive for feedback because we did have feedback surveys to get ratings and comments on every single workshop. But we would also wanted to leave students with a solid foundation to feel confident exploring these concepts on their own. So we learned many lessons about how to run these workshops and how to best collaborate between leader and audience. But the biggest lesson was that sharing knowledge and open source education is a way to break barriers in our field. And overall, I feel that collaboration really opens up a lot of doors, both in terms of generating design ideas and in sharing knowledge for us to progress best as a field. So I'm really excited to continue on my career and see all of the new opportunities that will come with future collaborations. So thank you very much. I don't know if there are any questions or from the audience.
So anyone can put their questions into the Q&A area or into the chat. Okay. So Mara, do you think that you could use this open source education for K through 12 students, or moving forward from what you learned to educating younger populations for the future of landscape architecture?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we really didn't try to overload these workshops, and some of them were more like fun. Like there was one on, well, I mean, all of them were fun, but there were ones that were like a little more accessible, I guess, to everybody. So there was one on visual narratives where we did some drawing exercises. We're shown some examples of how to develop your style. And those are things that I think are very accessible to everybody, even K through 12. And then there were more advanced ones, like ones that I gave on site analysis, on how to make maps or how to properly research your topics, that maybe would be better for like high school students. But we really had a really broad array of topics. And I think the best part was that everybody gave resources for people to further learn on their own. So I definitely think that this technology at least could definitely be applied in any context.
That's really great to hear. Did you, in doing this process of coming up with these technologies, did you also find any methods work best for connecting with the community?
Yeah, we had there were a couple strategies that we realized people really responded to. So for example, the surveys, especially in FIU ASLA, like for example, we have a really robust WhatsApp chat. I think there's like 90 people in there, like students, alumni, and that's how we usually communicate with all our members. And I think in the past, we kind of would throw out a question and be like, hey, would you guys be interested in this? And a couple people would be like, maybe, yeah, okay. But this year we started sending out surveys that asked people to, you know, quantify what they learned, what they wanted, what they didn't want, all of that stuff. And a lot of people really just appreciated being surveyed. So Google Forms surveys worked wonderfully. And also making presentations, I guess, intentionally interactive. Like we would have breaks in the speaking where we would maybe ask a question, or we would ask people to like write in the chat their thoughts, or had like a drawing exercise or something, but kind of laying that foundation from the beginning that this is going to be interactive and we're going to socialize. I think also was really important to people, considering that a majority of our time at school, we weren't actually able to interact organically. And then the resource packages were a huge incentive. I think we gave a plant library out once that was like 20 Florida native, like plant PNGs, and people were all over that. So yeah, survey at the beginning, interactive during, and resource packages after, I think is a perfect formula.
Wow, that sounds really wonderful. Let's see if there's any other questions in the chat. Oh. How did you find landscape architecture?
Well, I did not even know landscape architecture was a thing until 3 years ago when I applied to the program. I initially was working in civil engineering. I had always really been interested in science. I'd been really interested in everything from when I was born, I think. But I really was interested in science and ecology and the environment and how these larger systems work. So I got into civil engineering and finished my bachelor's with civil and environmental engineering, and worked at a great firm where I got to do a lot of really cool engineering stuff with historic preservation, materials research, things like that. And I really loved knowing how all these systems work, but I was missing a creative component and also the people component, because I really am a people person. So one of my best friends just happened to also be applying to landscape architecture school. And he was a year ahead of me, and he told me how great it was. I went to visit the program, and I'm like, oh, this is what I have been searching for my whole life. And yeah, I applied right out of undergrad, and from there, that was it. I really liked getting into the more people oriented stuff when, in engineering, I had really focused on more of the technical, like systems, sciencey things. But yeah, that was my journey into landscape architecture.
All right, and I think we have another question. Oh, sorry. And then, yep. You were saying how migrations are the catalyst for change. And do you have like a sense of how that's going to continue to change with climate migration moving forward? And do you think that like different cities and municipalities would start enacting these methods for connecting with their new populations?
I would really hope so. Because I mean, that project, my thesis project, was more of like a speculative future of if things go this way and end up positively, this is what could possibly result. Because I think people a lot of times get wrapped up in the logistics of like, oh, your dreams could never happen, but like, what if they could? What would that even look like? So it was kind of more to just provide a vision of what could possibly happen. But yeah, I mean, especially in the area that I chose, in Florida, that I specifically chose that county because it's going to see a lot of climate migration from these coastal cities in Florida, like Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, that are more progressive really than the interior of the state, especially in Central Florida. So I would anticipate that just because of all of the diverse demographics moving into this area, um, especially with all of the activist movements that are in these coastal cities, that they would have a lot of people power. We've seen this past year, you know, Black Lives Matter raised, I think, $90 million this year. Like there is a lot of power in people and their dreams and their movements. So I think that, yeah, I think that I am optimistic that we will see these changes. It won't be easy or I don't think smooth sailing at all, but I think that it is definitely possible.
That's what we need to hear moving forward. Okay. I think those are all the questions we have right now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was really great to be able to share, you know, fresh off of school and graduating.
Yeah, that was a wonderful program, and the presentation had so much information.
That's my MO.
Right. Well, if anyone else has any questions, put them in the chat now. Otherwise, thank you on behalf of the Michigan ASLA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And this webinar will be up on the website shortly.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.